That looks so fake.
We're right in front of the screen. Get us out of here.
Hey.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flicks Files. I apologise if I sound a little croaky and a bit like Barry White today. I've had a bit of a head cold, which I'm trying to shake off. And I was determined to film this video today because I'm going to talk about a movie that I really like, and I was just looking forward to making this video, so I didn't want to put it off any longer. So hopefully my coughs and sneezes and groans won't put you off watching this video. I do apologise. I'm going to, little disclaimer, I'm just going to say that, as always, I tend to do my videos in one take. And whenever I talk about a movie, I don't watch it beforehand as a refresher. And I don't use a script. So the way I like to talk about films is if I'm just chatting to you in a pub. And I'm giving you my interpretation of having watched this movie many, many times over the years. And that's just how I make videos. So inevitably, I'm going to miss certain plot elements and certain details I might get wrong. So feel free to comment below and correct me if you really feel the urge to. But also, I put that little disclaimer there just to negate some of the passive-aggressive comments that I get of people saying, oh, you say too often, or you keep saying when you talk. Well, yeah, most people do when they're sat talking for 20, 30 minutes. That's just the way it is, and I'm not going to edit it out. So either you like that or you don't. Hopefully you will, and you'll stick with me. So I know you guys enjoy me talking about science fiction movies, and I have a long, long list of them that I would love to talk about. And the last few that I've done are all from the 1970s, so I thought I'd try and bring it a little bit more up to date and talk about a movie that was released in 1985. So still a long time ago, but a decade later. I was in my teenage years at this time, and the first time I saw this movie, I think it was at a friend's house. One of my friends had a copy of it. I think they must have rented it from the local video shop. And I went down to his house one evening and we watched it because he was a big science fiction fan as well. And we both really, really loved it. So the movie I'm going to be talking about is Explorers. This was released in 1985 and was Joe Dante's next movie after his very successful movie Gremlins that was released the year previously. Now, it's interesting because when you watch this movie, if you didn't know anything about it, you would assume it was a fairly successful film because it is very enjoyable and it has special effects by Industrial Light and Magic, and there's a lot of production value there that makes this movie very watchable. But unfortunately, it was a huge flop on release, and this has been attributed to three reasons. One is that while he was making the movie, the studio were pushing Joe Dante to make a summer release, which he wasn't initially aiming for. So they had to kind of rush the script, which comes to light as we get to the end of the movie. And I talk about the end of the movie. It seems a little bit out of place compared to the rest of the film. So that's one of the reasons. The other two reasons are that this movie opened on, I think the date was Friday the 12th of July 1985, which anyone that knows their history will realize that that's the day before the Live Aid concert took place on Saturday the 13th of July. And that apparently had a big hit on the box office of this movie. People just stayed at home and watched Live Aid rather than going to the cinemas. And the third reason that people say this movie didn't do very well was that 9 days before this film came out, there was another little science fiction movie that was released called Back to the Future, which we all know was an incredible movie and a huge success. And that just stole all of the, the audience that would have gone to this movie. So it's a shame that this film flopped the way it did, but we still have it and we can still watch it and enjoy it. And I have the Shout Blu-ray release of this film that was released in America. And for a while, I was put off buying it because I was under the impression it was region locked. I think I read somewhere that most Shout releases in the USA are region locked. And then I read that it wasn't. So I took the plunge and ordered a copy. And sure enough, I was delighted to see that I could play it. And it's a lovely Blu-ray. It's pretty decent picture quality. It has a lot of extras. It displays on the box that there are two versions of the movie. But although off the top of my head, I can't remember what all the changes are, but they're very, very minor changes. Just a few slight additions to some scenes that amounts to, seconds, if not just a few minutes. So yeah, I really like this movie. And the reason I like it is because it was like, for me in my teenage years, that it was the start of like a new age of science fiction films that I just really, really loved during the 1980s. I think after the success of like Star Wars and Close Encounters and the sci-fi films of the late 70s, we started to get a very different type of science fiction movie in the 80s with things like Tron and E.T. the Extraterrestrial and The Last Starfighter. And then we got things like Back to the Future and Explorers. And then as we started to nudge towards the latter half of the 80s, we got into the real, more adult science fiction fare like RoboCop and Predator. All films that I love and all films that I'll probably be talking about at some point. So yeah, I really like this film. And it's really nice because the three main stars of the film are children that were kind of the age that I was when I first saw this film. So that gave me good reason to connect with it. And the movie opens with a very young Ethan Hawke, and he's having a dream where he's flying over what looks like some sort of computerized cityscape. But we quickly start to see that it's actually some sort of a circuit board that he's seeing in his dream. And he wakes up with a start. And a nice little touch is that the TV in his bedroom, I remember, is playing the George Pal's War of the Worlds from like 1955, I think it is, which is a film I have on Blu-ray. And it's a really lovely thing to have on in the background. It has very iconic sound effects and we can hear it. So he wakes up from this dream and he thinks that this circuit board that he's seen in this dream may have some importance. So while it's still fresh in his mind, he quickly jots it down. And he rings one of his friends, and one of his friends is played by, he's no longer with us, River Phoenix, when he was a very young actor. And I always think that if River Phoenix was still alive, he would have gone on to be an incredible actor and made some really, really fantastic films. But he was taken away from us at a very young age, sadly. But in this, he plays kind of the nerdy one of the three main child actors. So Ethan Hawke is Ben, and he's sort of the one that we connect with the most, I think. He's kind of the middle class of the bunch. And then we have Wolfgang, who's from a German family, and he's the brains of the bunch. He's sort of the professor, the nerd, if you want to call him that. And he rings him up and tells him that he's had this dream, and he's drawn some schematics. And the next day, he gives these drawings to Wolfgang with a view to see if he can do anything with them, if he can kind of build it, see if it will do anything. And it's while they're at the school, I seem to remember that Ben gets into a fight with a bully, with this other kid. And they have a bit of a fight, and that's where the third child comes into play, which is a character called Darren. And he's sort of he's from like a working class background. And we get the impression that he's got a bit of an abusive father, because he saves Ben from being beaten up in this fight. He kind of intervenes and saves the day. And in trying to divert attention away from Ben, I think he drops his Walkman, which Ben finds. Darren drops his Walkman and Ben picks it up. So after everybody's sort of departed, he tracks Darren down to give him his Walkman back and to say thank you for helping him out. And then he says that he's going to his friend Wolfgang's house and that he's quite happy to tag along, and he says it's quite a fun place and he's always up to something crazy. So he decides that, he will tag along with Ben and go to Wolfgang's house. So that's our bit of background on the three characters. And they get to Wolfgang's house, and Wolfgang's I think it's his father's laboratory that he's using that's in the basement of the house. And he's got all of this electrical gear and various equipment all laid out. And he explains to Ben and Darren that he has built this circuit board that was that Ben had drawn from his dream. And he says, I've plugged it into the computer. I was just waiting for you to arrive before we switch it on and see what happens. And he switches it on, and they see that the circuit board is kind of programming itself. I seem to remember there's a shot where you can see all of this, code appearing on the screen. And then it just stops with a cursor. And I think Wolfgang says, it's asking for coordinates. It's asking for like a place in space. So he enters some numbers, and suddenly some books on a bookshelf further along in the room fall off the bookshelf. And, it makes them all jump. And then he puts in some more numbers. And all the books on the bookshelf fall off. And when they run up and examine them, they see that every book has like a perfect circular hole that's been cut into it by something invisible that's traveled through them. And they all think this is really bizarre. And I think it's at that point that the father comes downstairs because he hears a ruckus. And there's a little scene in the basement that I always thought was funny, where they have a little mouse that's in a cage, and it has little foot pedals. And when it presses particular foot pedals, it can say a certain word.
There you go. See, I put these sentences into his voice synthesizer. Sometimes they make sense.
So it'll like press down on a foot pedal and you hear it go, cheese, cheese, and things like that. And I remember that there's a bit where Wolfgang's father comes downstairs and he's looking for the bug bomb, whether they have a bit of a roach problem. And he walks past the mouse and you hear the mouse's voice synthesizer go, go to hell, which always made me giggle.
I seriously doubt it, Father.
Hello, Heinlein. Shut up, Heinlein.
So, they go back to Wolfgang's house the next day. And he explains that he's worked out what this circuit board is actually doing. And it's generating a little ball that floats in space. And they make it visible so they can see it. And it's like a little blue, about the size of a tennis ball. And they can go up to it and tap it with their finger.
Can I touch it? Go ahead.
So it's like a solid object. And using the computer, they can move this object through three-dimensional space. So there's a funny sequence where the cat of the family jumps onto the keyboard of the computer, thus making this ball zigzag and shoot around the entire basement, and then it flies out the window and causes all sorts of mayhem. And I think it's Darren that sees this. And he says, if we can make this big enough, and if we can find something to sit in, we could move around in this thing. You know what I mean? And you can see them all think, oh, gosh, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So then it leads them to another experiment where they take it out up onto this hillside under this tree. And I think the idea is they're just going to try and fly it round outside where they've got more space. And as Wolfgang is surveying the ground nearby, I think he's looking for like a good starting point. Ben is kind of a little bit dismayed that he thought up this circuit board, and he's like, this is my invention. You know, I should be able to have a go on it. So he picks up the computer and switches it on. And he happens to make the force field ball materialize right where River Phoenix is standing. So he ends up kind of appearing inside this ball. He's like trapped inside it. And of course, then they go, oh God, how do you switch it off? And they tap in all these numbers and they end up moving the ball to the point where it just shoots into the ground. And there's this really funny shot where River Phoenix is trapped inside this ball as it's like moving under the ground and just tunneling through all this earth at a tremendous speed.
This is like Journey to the Center of the Earth or something.
Are you crazy? He's on his way to China.
And eventually they switch the force field off and River Phoenix kind of falls out of the air and lands into the branches of the tree. And when he finally comes to his senses, he realizes that while he was inside this ball, he couldn't feel any inertia. So it didn't feel like he was moving at a tremendous speed. And that's where they really realize we could fly around in this thing. You know, we could sit inside it and maybe, you know, go high up into the atmosphere. And as a kid, when you're watching this, you think, God, what a brilliant idea. How fun would that be? You know, I mean, it's completely ridiculous, but it is science fiction. And that's what I love about science fiction, is how it can come up with ideas like this that are just so much fun. So it's at that point in the movie that the three of them go to this junkyard in the dead of night, and they find an old, I think it's like a pod from an old, like a Wurlitzer fairground ride that the three of them can sit in. And luckily it's on wheels, and they end up wheeling it back to like this creek, which is near Wolfgang's house. And I think that's one of the scenes in the extended version, is where they're wheeling this Wurlitzer carriage down this road, and it kind of starts to run away from them to the point that it's like rolling down of its own free will, and they're all running after it. I'm sure that's one of the extra scenes. But what's really nice is, even though they're kids, they think it through quite logically. So they realize that if they put the Wurlitzer so the force field ball is around it, so they're sat inside the ball, inside this carriage, then, you know, they've got seats, they can mount the computer. But then what else do they need? They realize that they'll need oxygen. So they get an oxygen tank with a little gas mask that they can breathe from. And then in their own unique childish way, they get supplies, which is like a bag of fries and candy bars and things that they can eat while they're traveling. So then they go on their first jaunt, sitting in this ball, because they can change the size of it and make it big enough that they can put the carriage inside it. And, you know, they go for a fly around the town. So Ben comes up with the idea of, oh no, I'm telling a lie. I think this is earlier in the movie when they're sitting in the ball. He uses it to peek on his crush. There's a girl in school that he really likes, and there's a sequence where he's sat inside this ball and they float it up past this girl's bedroom window so he can look inside. That was a bit earlier in the movie. I got my facts wrong. But they're flying around in this ball, and it's there that we're introduced to Dick Miller, the actor Dick Miller. Now, Dick Miller carved a career out of playing small roles. He was just a character actor. He was never really a fully fledged movie star, but he has a very unique face. He's one of those actors that when you see him, you think, oh gosh, I've seen him in things before. And he was in a lot of Joe Dante movies. And in this, he plays kind of an airborne sheriff who flies a helicopter. And he comes across this pod that's flying around. And there's a fantastic effect sequence that I always loved. And even now, I look at it and think it was impressive. And I can remember seeing this in 1985. So you got to think this is, you know, like 8 years before computer effects really started to take off in movies, before Jurassic Park. And this particular sequence, I remember watching it thinking, how in the hell did they do that? And you can see the pod kind of floating in midair, and the helicopter is flying around the pod, shining a spotlight on the pod as it goes around it. And it looks really, really impressive. And Dick Miller's thinking, is this a UFO? And he looks closely, and through the window of the carriage that they're sat in, he sees the face of one of the kids with the oxygen mask on. And you see him think, oh my God, because he thinks it's an alien. It's really funny. So anyway, they end up shooting off, and he loses track of them. And it's at that point that there's a little subplot where he kind of has always believed in UFOs and aliens. And he feels that he owes it to himself to try and find out what it was that he saw. So Dick Miller goes a wandering in the area where he saw it flying around, and he comes across the carriage that they were sat in. And he has a rummage inside, and he finds Ben's jacket that's got his name in the collar. So he goes to find him, and says, this is you, isn't it? I saw you in that carriage. And I think he scares the kid away, but I think he just wants to talk to them to find out how they did it and what it were they were doing. And he doesn't mean to arrest them. I think he does it completely innocently. But he ends up scaring Ben away when he tracks him down. So, yeah, we then get into kind of the final act of the movie, where Ben has another dream, and he draws a new piece of circuit board, which when they build it, they find that it creates an endless supply of oxygen gas. So they realize that they don't need an oxygen tank anymore. They can now sit in this pod for as long as they need, and they will always have breathable air. And that's where they realize they've got everything they need to break out through the atmosphere and to fly this thing into deep space. And that's the lead up to the third act of the movie. And this is where things do take a bit of a strange turn, for better or worse. And you do get the impression that, yes, at script stage, this was probably rushed to get an ending of the film made so they could release it in the summer of 1985. And I like the ending, but I can see that some people will be a little bit disappointed with it. But basically what happens is they do fly into space, and they get picked up by this alien ship. And when they land in the ship and they get out of their bubble, as it were, I think they're first approached by this big robotic spider that kind of scans them and, takes photographs of them, this really weird looking thing. And I seem to remember there's a bit that comes out of this spider that looks like a large, vacuum cleaner hose, and it's sniffing them, and you can hear it going, and it's like smelling their clothes. And Wolfgang, River Phoenix's character, he kind of wanders off and gets separated from the other two. And we find out that he's the first to encounter the aliens that are on board. And the aliens are a boy and a girl alien. And I don't know the actress that plays the girl alien, but the boy alien is played by the actor Robert Picardo, who is another actor that Joe Dante likes to use quite a lot. And Robert Picardo, in his early career, he played quite a few roles where he would be in heavy makeup. And one film that comes to mind is Ridley Scott's Legend. And he plays a character called Meg Mucklebones that lives in a swamp in Legend that Tom Cruise has a confrontation with, a really evil-looking character. But that's Robert Picardo. You'd never know it when you watch the movie because he's in so much makeup. But the design of the aliens is very cartoonish, and yeah, it's a unique look, and either you'll like it or you won't. But they have like, you know, there's elements of Jar Jar Binks there when I think about it. It's kind of a cross between Jar Jar Binks and Shrek, as odd as that sounds. And obviously, I'll be putting clips in to show you. But they end up befriending these two aliens, and they realize that they speak using language that they've picked up from watching endless TV shows from Earth. So certainly the boy alien just tends to communicate with lots of different sound bites from many, many different programs.
The amazing kitchen companion. It slices, minces, quinces. Even makes french fries, shoestring, or pickle cut.
Which is totally bizarre and funny in certain respects. And they explained that they wanted to meet people from Earth, but they couldn't actually land on Earth because of all the germs. It would have been very dangerous for them. So they implanted dreams into Ben's head to get him to build the bits that they need, that they would build this little bubble spaceship which would bring them to them so they could meet them. And that's kind of the plot of the movie. You know, that was the aim of these two aliens. And it turns out that they are much like the three boys. They're teenage aliens that have a bit of an angry father that they wanted to get away from. So they end up effectively stealing the spaceship, you know, as if they stole their dad's car. And at the end of the movie, a larger spaceship arrives that picks up the ship that they're all on. And we see a huge, bigger version of these aliens appears, and it's their father. And, you know, when he's speaking gobbledygook, he's speaking in an alien language, but the boys quickly realize that, hang on a minute, this is their dad, and he's really angry at them for stealing the spaceship. You know, and there's like a funny, slightly sped up sequence where you see him like looking down on them going, blah, 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 and he's like really shouting at them. So they have to say their goodbyes. And as they're leaving, the girl alien gives Ben a little kind of amulet and gives it him as a gift. And Ben says, what's this for? And they go, it's the stuff dreams are made of. And, you know, when they end up having to leave and they go back to Earth. And they get back to Earth. And the final scenes of the movie is where they're kind of sad that, you know, they had this fantastic adventure and they met these aliens. And they're wondering if they'll ever see them again. You know, and life suddenly seems rather dull after that adventure. And at the end of the film, they all have another dream, but this time they all have the dream collectively. And in the dream, the girl that Ben has had a crush on throughout the movie, she appears. So the four of them are in this collective dream and they're all sharing it together. And they're all flying over this even larger circuit board. So this is obviously sequel bait. And if the movie was successful, you know, we can only wonder what this other circuit board would have made had they made an Explorers 2, and, you know, what this would have built. But that's the end of the movie. And as I say, it is an ending that in a lot of respects feels rushed. But, you know, over the years, I've watched this many times and I've grown to love the ending simply because I like the rest of the movie. And it's such a shame that it was a flop. And Joe Dante has always been one of my favorite directors. And he never, I said this before in the Joe Dante collection video that I did, in that he kind of hit the scene with Gremlins, which was a huge success. And then all the movies he made after that, he never quite hit that same level of success. He was always striving to, you know, to hit that box office peak. But the movies that he made are really, really fun films, you know, and collectively, it's a great little body of work. And he did, you know, some great movies after Explorers that are a fun watch. And again, are films that I'll be talking about. So yeah, so that's Explorers, released in 1985. So I hope you enjoyed my little chat about that, and hopefully the bits that I remembered make sense and I've got most of the details right. One thing that I am going to mention, which has annoyed me a lot about the other films that I've talked of, is that I forget to mention the musical scores. And other films that I've talked about have had some brilliant scores. And I'm thinking of The Black Hole. The Black Hole, John Barry's score, fantastic. And I never mentioned it. I never mentioned it in my review, like a complete idiot. So Joe Dante's movies, a lot of them were scored by the wonderful Jerry Goldsmith. Now, Jerry Goldsmith is probably my favourite film composer after John Williams. And he did the score for my favourite movie of all time, Alien. And his score in Explorers is wonderful. And it has a lovely kind of soft orchestral score throughout. But at the end of the movie, when the final credits appear, he does like a complete tonal shift of the score. And he does this sort of fun, kind of Looney Tunes march music, which I'll try and play a little bit of here. So yeah, the music for the movie is wonderful as well.
I know you're out there. I can feel the popcorn.
So yeah, so that's Explorers. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope my gurgles and coughs didn't put you off. I'm so sorry, but as I say, I was determined to get this movie talked about, and I wanted to make this video, and I felt the time was right. So who cares if I've got a cold? You know, I can battle through this fine. Yeah, so there we go. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.